like to call to order the July MTA Board Meeting. I'd like to welcome our board members and members of the public and press to this room as we convene for the first full in-person meeting since February of last year. It's great to see you all here today in person. Now I'd like to ask our General Counsel, Tom Quigley, to provide an update on quorum for the record. Tom.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Each of the board members' attendance will be recorded for the record, and I can confidently say, Mr. Chairman, that we have a quorum.
Thank you, Tom. Before we hear from public speakers, we'll have a brief safety announcement.
Your safety is of foremost importance to the MTA. Therefore, we ask that you listen to the following instructions. In the event of an emergency, notify emergency personnel in the room, and 911 should be called. If an alarm sounds, wait for a public address announcement and follow instructions. If told to go to another floor or to evacuate the building, leave all unessential items behind and use stairwell A just across the main hallway or stairwell D down the hallway past the elevators. An automated external defibrillator, AED, for use by trained personnel is in the main hallway just past the elevators. Thank you and have a safe day.
Let's hear from our public speakers. Leah.
Good morning. We have 7 members of the public registered to speak today. As a reminder, we ask that all public speakers adhere to the MTA's rules of conduct and decorum. I'd also like to remind our public speakers that in the interest of time and fairness to all speakers, we limit everyone to 2 minutes. Please be aware of the clock in the front of the room and the warning light you will see reminding you that you have 30 seconds left to conclude your remarks. The first speaker will be Jeanette Murray, followed by Lisa Daglian. Our next speaker will be Lisa Daglian, followed by Valerie Joseph.
Good morning. I'm Lisa Daglian, Executive Director of the Permanent Citizens Advisory Committee to the MTA PCAC. It's great to be here today at the first in-person MTA board meeting in more than a year. However, it's a bittersweet day as it's your last board meeting, Pat. As the Beatles said, you say goodbye and I say hello. Before you take your leave, we'd like to express our appreciation on behalf of riders of subways and buses, the Long Island Railroad, and Metro North, from all of us at PCAC, for all you've done to keep the system going, including pulling together resources from across the U.S. to keep in critical funding that will keep the trains and buses rolling. Thank you for your steady hand and head as we roll toward our new reality, including recognizing the need to find better ways to continue to incorporate commuter rail into the fabric of the city and the region. That vision is shared by the board, and we were grateful to hear you'll be holding off on fare hikes in 2021 as a way to encourage people to return to the system. Not having to pay more is good news that riders can use. In addition, more equitable fare policy, including a more robust Fair Fares program, creative ticketing that includes 20-trip discounted tickets, and an expanded Freedom Ticket pilot would encourage even more riders to get on board, critical as our region and economy continue to rebound and reopen. We look forward to continuing those conversations with the board and your successor or successors. Our region still faces a long recovery, and it's important that the MTA have strong and steady leadership going forward in the most expedient manner possible. That decision can't wait. We expect to hear that despite federal aid, there will still be a bumpy ride in the coming years, and that's why moving congestion pricing ahead is key, as is updating us transparently and regularly. An important step is the resolution in support of the capital lockbox city sales tax, which would secure the city's portion of sales tax for CBD tolling and generate $3.7 billion in bonding, essential to ensuring the success of the 2024 capital plan, our transit system, and region. Again, thank you, Pat, for all you've done.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Valerie Joseph, followed by Larry Penner.
Good morning, MTA board members. I'm Valerie Joseph from the Brooklyn Center for the Independence of the Disabled. I'm pleased to be back in person, but getting to 2 Broadway at 9 a.m. to testify can be a real hassle or even impossible. for the disabled population, not to mention other transit riders across the MTA region. The funny thing is, after testifying here on Monday, I realized the MTA is willing to make it easy for its own officials to avoid attending meetings here in person, but not us. The New York City Transit interim president showed up from her home, and a procurement officer and a police officer gave remote reports too. But for riders, it is a different story. There is no remote speaking. Why not? Shouldn't a remote real-time speaking option also be available to the public? That way you will you'll have the opportunity to hear from all your constituents, not just those who can make it here downtown. Otherwise, it's a ridiculous double standard. You can do better and should do better. On Monday, I testified about the MTA's decision to return to shared rides on Accessoride. Even as the Delta variant rages, not a good idea. The MTA also says it has rules that will limit the number of shared rides, but has not told us what those rules are. Can someone on the board please find out and let us know? Finally, a few days away from the 31st anniversary of the Americans with Disabilities Act, it's long past time for the MTA to settle the subway accessibility lawsuits with BCID and other organizations. We need a legal binding settlement to make 100% of the stations accessible. Thank you. What's the delay?
Thank you. Our next speaker is Larry Penner, followed by Jason Anthony.
My name is Larry Penner. I'm a transportation advocate, historian, and writer who previously worked for the Federal Transit Administration in the development, review, approval, and oversight of billions of dollars in capital projects to your agency. The Second CARE Act was passed on December 27th with $14 billion out of $900 billion for transit. The Third Act was passed on March 11th, 2021, providing $30 billion for transit. We're now into our 7th month with New Jersey Transit and MTA unable to come to agreement on how to split those funds. This means FTA cannot obligate and approve the funds that you prematurely took a victory celebration lap around the building. FTA wanted grants submitted by the July 20th to guarantee obligation by the end of September. As each day passes, the window closes in FTA's ability to obligate the funds before the financial system closes the week of September's 20th. Your grants will be carried over to the end of October when FTA's financial system comes back online. The problem is new requirements kick in for federal fiscal year 2022. I would point out your annual certification assurances takes many weeks to process. At the end of the day, you may not be able to get access to these monies till December. This is ironic considering the financial situation you face today. I would also point out your inability to split the funds between New York and New Jersey affects all the non-MTA transit agencies in New York. The New York Metropolitan Transportation Council cannot complete their split for funds for Nassau, Suffolk, Westchester, Putnam, Rockland, Long Beach, and Huntington. They do not have the ability to borrow funds like you do. I'd also point out congestion pricing is not going to kick into the 4th year of a 5-year plan. You promised $1 billion a year in revenue to generate $2 billion more for $3 billion a year for a total of $15 billion a year. How do you leverage $15 billion in congestion pricing funding if you only have 2 years to collect those funds? Also, your 20-year capital needs assessment update from 2020 to 2040 was promised to be released in December 2019. It's 19 months later. Where is it? Is there a brave member of this board who will address these questions? Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Jason Anthony, followed by Kenneth Murray.
Good morning. Where is Lauren Schwartz? Where is Linda Lacewell? Hi, Rob. Good morning, Patrick Joseph. This right here reminds us all That's a federal mandate that we should use it. New York City Transit is violating that federal mandate. The NYPD is violating that mandate. Patrick Joseph, I saw you for the first time in 2017 when you are the executive director of the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey. When you gave us the now approved the backwards Air Train LaGuardia, and when I confronted you in the Parade of Heroes, you forgot that you was the head of the Port Authority when the capital plan of 2017 to 2026, you voted for it. And you gave New Jersey commuters a bike path on the GWB. Today, we tell you goodbye and good luck in your endeavors with Governor Andrew Mark Cuomo. But Lauren Schwartz gave us good news on Monday. We want to hear the other two people that are involved that we don't want to pay more when we ride the subway. Like Linda
Please conclude
Lacewell
your remarks.
and Robert Mojica. So speak up right now.
Thank you. The next speaker is Kenneth Murray, followed by Jackie Cohen.
I am a part of the stations department. The situation is that we were a part of a very, very good customer service program. And that program is called the Wayfinder program. Our job was to provide customer service and to make sure that the customers can navigate through the system. When COVID-19 happened, that program stopped and then it was dismissed. So every day now, I go to work and I sit in a rectangular box. But recently, I have found out that United Allied Security is now doing my job. The Wayfinder program is a good customer service job. The Wayfinders that did that job, we did it with honor and dignity. Wayfinders provide a very, very good, see, I'm a little bit angry now, a very, very good way of helping the customer. There is no reason at all to stop this program except money. Now the system is back open. I am asking this board to reinstitute the Wayfinder program that we can get back on track and help the customers navigate through this system correctly with honor and dignity. I thank you all.
Thank you. The next speaker is Jackie Cohen, followed by Iman Ramawi.
Hi, my name is Jackie Cohen. I'm the campaign director for the Strap Hangers campaign. Very nice to see you all in person. We're so happy to see that Omni has become such a popular and increasingly popular option for strap hangers, but we do feel that the technology is being underutilized and can do more to speed up trips as well as provide financial relief for lower income riders. So I'm here today with two asks. My first is that you use Omni to enact all-door boarding system-wide on buses. MTA buses spend over 20% of their overall trip time just sitting at bus stops waiting for riders to board single file. All-door boarding cuts this dwell time in half. In 2019, we celebrated this agency's commitment to enact all-door boarding with full implementation by 2021, and we were thrilled to see Omni readers installed on every bus. We were concerned then to learn that the start date for all-door boarding has been moved so far into the future. All buses are ready to enact outdoor boarding today, and riders who have been burdened with some of the slowest commutes in the country are ready for a change. With congestion levels continuing to soar, a 2023 implementation date just doesn't make sense. It's vital that this agency use every tool available to ensure bus riders can travel quickly and reliably. Now, my second ask is that you use Omni to adopt a fare capping policy. It's an unfortunate truth that lower income transit riders often tend to pay higher fares. Strap hangers that can afford to pay $127 a month upfront are rewarded with unlimited rides, yet those that can't front the cash often end up paying more for more expensive single fare rides. Many low income New Yorkers do not meet the threshold to qualify for half price Metro cards. Capping the fare would ensure that all riders have access to the same unlimited fare option, whether they can afford to pay upfront or not. Fair Fares is a vital program that the city subsidizes to make transit more affordable for New Yorkers living at or below the federal poverty level. But it is only one piece of the puzzle towards solving the transit affordability crisis, and it's vital that this agency do more with the new technology it has to further alleviate this financial burden for low-income New Yorkers. Thank you.
Thank you. Our final speaker is Iman Ramawi.
Thank you. Hi, good morning. My name is Iman Ramawi, and I'm from New York Lawyers for the Public Interest. I'm here to talk about my concerns with the reinstatement of shared rides on Accessoride, as well as these in-person meetings. As you can see, I'm an amputee, and I also have lupus. And I'm an amputee because my lupus flared up 9 years ago due to stress on my body from a miscarriage. COVID would also cause this kind of stress and would nearly cost me my life. Accessoride riders do not have the same choices that TLC customers have with on-demand. TLC customers can choose other transportation options, and they can choose not to do shared rides, but Accessoride riders can't. Why would you put our most vulnerable customers in that kind of situation? I've already lost 35 friends, most of whom weren't disabled, but they still died because of COVID. The new COVID variant is still ramping up, and I don't want to lose any more friends. I also just did chemo last month, and they told me for the next 6 months that I should avoid big crowds. But because I'm vaccinated and because this is so vitally important, I put myself in harm's way to prove a point. Why is my life not as important to the MTA as the 5011 board members that are virtual right now? Why is there no public option for people to make comments? Why are you putting people with disabilities at risk? And my colleague Ruth Lowenkron couldn't be here today because she broke her foot and couldn't ride all the way from Jersey all the way here. And if I'm going to do in-person meetings, do the right thing and keep the virtual option available. If you're going to have public comments in person, do the right thing and keep the virtual option available. Do not take away what amounts to reasonable accommodations in the name of getting back to normal, since business as usual didn't, doesn't, and won't work for all of us. We are customers, we are voters, and we are very active. And I also heard Omni mentioned a bunch of times, and even though Accessoride is getting Omni in September, we still won't get discounts, which was promised to Accessoride customers, who still don't get discounts to use the service. And I'd really like a discount because I'm paying a lot of money to use Accessoride. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Chair, that concludes the public comment.
Thank you, Leah, and thank you to the public speakers. I will say that the option of public speakers having a virtual option is being considered, and more on that in the future. I'll make some brief remarks later in the meeting. Before I turn to Bob Foran to present the July financial plan, I want to note a few matters. First, this financial plan reflects our latest projections, the best assessment based on what we know now, and presents options for addressing the deficit. Second, no action needs to be taken today on the financial plan itself. We are not adopting a budget today. This is an informational update only. Third, earlier in this week, members of the Finance Committee recommended that the MTA postpone the fare increase for 2021. This would have an impact on the options for addressing the deficit, which we can discuss after Bob Foran makes his presentation, and we will make that adjustment in the November financial plan. Importantly, I note the following. The MTA has received an unprecedented allocation of federal aid, $14.5 billion. While receipt of these funds is critical to addressing the immediate and unprecedented crisis and its aftermath, it is not a recurring source of funding. Before the pandemic, the MTA faced significant structural deficits and balanced its budget using one-shots each year. But that is not a sustainable long-term strategy. The agency needs new recurring revenue sources. We've executed a tremendous amount of self-help. Since 2010, the agency has identified nearly $3 billion in annual recurring savings. In 2019, we implemented a 10% reduction on consulting contracts that generated over $140 million in savings, and identified an additional $570 million on overtime, consulting, and other non-personnel expense reductions for 2021. That said, the deficits are so significant that budget reductions alone cannot solve this crisis. The underlying structural problem still exists after the exceptional circumstances of the pandemic, as ridership forms a new normal, and after we've exhausted the exceptional aid the MTA has received. The MTA will again face significant deficits. We will need new additional recurring revenues in significant amounts, collectively totaling billions of dollars annually, to sustain today's service and staffing levels. And with that, I'll turn to our CFO.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can we put up the title screen? Thank you. The July financial plan includes the 2021 mid-year forecast, the 2022 preliminary budget, and the financial plan for 2022 through 2025. Now, this is the first time that we're going to get a look at what we're projecting for 2025. As is our practice, let's start with the review of the prior plan, the February plan, which, as you know, is our annual budget. Next slide, please. In the February plan, we used farebox revenues based on McKinsey's worst-case scenario. And again, we used the worst-case scenario because we realized at that time we had no downside risk that we could accept. Things were that bad. So we hoped that things would improve. We projected a 4% fare increase assumed to be implemented in September 2021 that would generate about $513 million through 2024. Toll revenues were based upon McKinsey's midpoint scenario. We had CARES Act, that was the first federal aid, totaling $4 billion, and we received that in 2020. CRRSA funding of about $4 billion was expected to be received this year in 2021. We were looking for FEMA reimbursement of about $221 million for expenses, direct COVID-related expenses that we had incurred, and to receive that this year. We borrowed deficit financing borrowing of $2.9 billion through the Federal Reserve in late 2020. We assumed service reductions would be implemented in 2023 based on a right sizing of a new normal under the worst-case scenario. If we were to do that, under that assumption, it would generate $1.255 billion of savings through 2024. We also assumed a wage freeze for all employees, represented and non-represented, assumed through 2022, and that would generate $946 million of savings through 2024. Now, this is presented on a year-by-year basis on the following slide. Again, the February plan. First, if you look at 2020, you see that we ended the year with about $500 million of operating cash. Now, I want to remind you, that's after we received $4 billion in federal aid, and we had a few things that worked in our favor. So we took that $500 million and we rolled it over into this year, which gave us a projected deficit, as you can see at the top of the column, late 2021, of $5.6 billion deficit that we were facing. Now, all the items that we're looking at today included an assumed 2021 fare and toll increase of 4%, a 2023 fare and toll increase of 4%. And as you all know, those are not automatic. They're subject to public hearings, they're subject to board vote and approval, but for financial projection purposes, we put it into the plan. So we received the proceeds in late December of $2.9 billion. The original plan when we were first looking at 2020 was that we might need all of that to balance 2020. But again, we did have the federal aid that came in, and we also had the CRRSA federal aid that was passed in December. So that suddenly changed our financial plan from needing all of that $2.9 billion proceeds of deficit financing to needing much less. So the 2021 February plan assumed the $4 billion of CRRSA aid to come this year, reducing the amount of deficit financing we'd have to do to $1.65 billion. So basically, as you can see at the bottom of that column, we were projecting a break even. But as you look across the top of the schedule, you'll see that we were still projecting ongoing deficits. In 2022, we assumed we'd use the balance of the deficit financing from the Federal Reserve of $1.25 billion to reduce our deficit. We also put in place in the forecast the assumption of a wage freeze, which you can see is $309 million assumed savings in 22 and then carries out roughly the same amount in 2023 and 2024. But even with that, we were projecting a $3.1 billion deficit. Again, you can just see the deficits each year continue, even with the service adjustment that we put in place to begin in 2023 to 2024. Well, all of those assumptions took projected deficits of $17 billion through 2024 and reduced it down to the $8 billion deficit that you heard the chairman talk about many times, that we needed $8 billion if we were going to balance our books through 2024, and hence the federal request for additional federal aid. So what has happened, oh, and I should say on the next chart, please, that even with the $4 billion of CRRSA federal aid expected this year, we still are going to need deficit financing proceeds at that time to balance 2021 and to reduce the deficit of 2022. So what's changed since the February plan? Well, fortunately, a number of things have changed, and it's positive. First, we have federal, next slide please. First, the federal ARPA, the rescue plan legislation was passed, and we expect to receive $6.5 billion from the federal government. We're waiting for CRRSA funding to be allocated between New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut. The fare box revenues that we're seeing year to date have been trending positively, higher. And so with year-to-date actuals and now using the McKinsey midpoint estimate instead of the worst case, we're increasing our projections of revenue by $3.7 billion through 2024. As you know, we deferred the implementation from early in 2021 to later in 2021 for the assumption. Toll revenues were revised to reflect year-to-date actual and also continuing improvement and using McKinsey's best case scenario, which increased our revenues almost $800 million through 2024. State and local subsidies and dedicated taxes, the assumptions were revised, increasing revenue by $1.4 billion through 2024. Now I have to kind of make an adjustment there. Those are total revenues of $1.4 billion, but as you recall, the state legislature gave us the ability to use lockbox subsidies in 2 years, in 2020 and in 2024, for operating purposes to help address the deficit. Otherwise, those monies were committed to the 20 to 24 capital program. We used those monies in 2020. With the federal dollars, ARPA, coming in, we believe that we don't need to use them this year, and they can be used for the capital program, which, as you've heard Jano talk about before, and you're going to hear more today, we're really trying to move the capital program forward for the benefit of all of our customers. So that reduced the $1.4 billion by about $500 million. We are expecting FEMA reimbursements through an extended coverage period that the administration has now granted us. So expenses can now be recovered through April of 2021 as opposed to September of 2020. And so we expect to get another $140 million in 2022. The service reductions that we're still putting in as an assumption no longer are based on the worst case ridership scenarios, they're based on the midpoint. Well, that just means that the potential savings would be less because we're going to have higher service providing to reflect the higher ridership. So it reduces our savings from $1.25 billion to $426 million through 2024. Now, we have now a 2-year wage freeze. With the federal dollars that we've been promised, we are now going to meet every one of our financial commitments with our collective bargaining units. And so it will be for TW Local 100, it will be for a number of unions who've accepted a 2-year pattern following agreement that we voted on and approved last month. And then we're assuming that those that typically follow the pattern will also eventually agree. And so we built into the financial plan a 2-year pattern following amount for them as well. Frankly, what we're doing is we're saying we'd love to do the pattern if we could. That was the plan that was built in originally. We don't know what the future is going to hold, so we're basically saying let's go on pause right now after 2 years for our labor agreements and negotiations, see what the future holds, and then let's come up with an affordable labor settlement. And then contributions to capital. We had put aside pay-as-you-go capital, taken it out of the capital program and put it into deficit reduction because we thought we were going to need it. Well, now again, with the federal dollars coming in, we're going to move that back into the capital program and be available. So that's an extra $600 million over through 2023 that's available again to help keep our capital program moving forward. So again, I'm going to present this on a year-by-year basis so you can kind of see how the money flows in, and you'll start to see what the risks are for us. So on this slide, you see the top line again. This is what we are projecting is the financial deficit each year after certain assumptions are made. However, the top line now only shows a fare and toll increase in 23 and 25. Okay, I've taken out the 2021 fare increase, and I'm showed that as a separate line. And the reason I'm showing it as a separate line is, again, the board has expressed some interest in not having anything this year. So that doesn't mean, as it's been stated, that it wouldn't happen in the future. But whenever you do a fare increase, it's not just the revenue you generate that year. It's revenue that continues on an ongoing basis. So I just wanted to lay out for you what's the ongoing revenues associated with a fare increase. Now, again, I'm just going to say it so we'll all understand and agree. If it's not a fare increase, but it's a new revenue stream from some other source, which it could be, we need something that will recur in these amounts going forward to keep us whole. So again, I have it listed as the 21 fare increase, but it could be any revenue stream that gives us a comparable amount. The service reductions you see here, again, they're reduced because now we're basing on service at the midpoint level. The 2-year wage freeze you've already heard, we're honoring all contracts and we're basically putting it on pause to the equivalent of the second 2 years of a 4-year pattern. What this all does is it then means, the deficit financing is what we're going to be looking to balance out. So the federal aid that we received, the $6.9 billion, took us most of the way. These assumptions that I've laid out, both on a fare increase, service reductions, 2-year wage freeze, get us more, but we still need something to balance, and it's still deficit financing. So as you can see here on this schedule, to get down to a zero all the way to 2024 or 25, we're going to need $1.3 billion of deficit financing proceeds, okay? That's money not available for anything else, but we're using it just for operating expenses. Next chart, please. Even with $6.5 billion worth of ARPA funding, the July plan, as you saw on the prior page, still assumes a fare increase or comparable revenue, a 2-year wage freeze, the right sizing of service, and the bond proceeds that I just mentioned of $1.3 billion. just to balance in 2025. What this chart does is it just shows you graphically kind of the significance of each of these items. Okay, you could pull one out, you could substitute it, but you got to come up with equivalent revenues to offset deficits. Now, I point out in the box at the bottom of this page that, again, this is assuming future revenue projections, which may or may not hold true. It could be that revenues in the future ridership are higher. It could be that dedicated taxes are higher. It could be that they're less. But to the extent that actual ridership and actual economic driven revenues and taxes come in higher than we're projecting, these things may not be necessary, or these amounts may not be necessary. So again, a financial plan is merely projections, but again, based on our best projections, as the chairman said at this point in time, this is what the future looks like. Let's go to the next chart. So this lays out, again, year by year, and it just says the July plan without additional revenues, without something that gives us the economic value of a wage freeze, without something that gives us the economic value of right-sizing our service, well, it will require us to accelerate the use of the ARP money. In other words, we can't stretch it out. We're going to have to use it sooner. And as you can see here, we're going to use that in 2024, and that's when it's going to run out. And we're going to need to use, as you can see down on the second to the last line in the schedule, all of the deficit financing, $850 million in 2024, $2 billion in 2025, and we're still projecting a $600 million deficit in 2024, or 25 rather. So again, with all of the federal aid, now by this time we've had, $14.5 billion of federal aid. We're having, more favorable ridership than we first thought. We're making some assumptions that you may not like and you may not want, but at least we're making assumptions to try to generate savings on our part, and we still need to borrow and use proceeds of $2.9 billion and have a deficit remaining in this scenario. So let's go to the next chart. Again, I'm showing you much the same information, but different ways to help you kind of perhaps think it through how best and most convenient for you. But again, without the 2021 fare increase or revenues comparable, the wage freeze, right sizing, we're going to run out of federal aid by 2024, and we'll face a $3.5 billion cumulative deficit in 24 and 25. That's what we're facing, a cumulative deficit of $3.5 billion over those 2 years. Another way of looking at it is we're talking about a structural deficit in 2025 of $2.6 billion. That's the bottom of the right-hand column. That's our total deficit. We don't have anything else to use as one-shots, but in this forecast, our expenses are exceeding our revenues in that year by $2.6 billion. So this is a snapshot based on these assumptions of what our structural deficit looks like then and would continue forward absent action being taken by this board at some time prior to getting there. So what are our risks that this really shows? Let's go to the last chart. First, we have to continue the aggressive cost cutting that we've done. We can't stop. First of all, we can't let up on the pressure that we've been applying because we can't backslide. I don't want to give up any savings that we've already achieved. Two, we've got to continue to figure out where are there efficiencies to be obtained in the administrative and operating sides of our business. I know they're there. You know they're there. We've just got to pursue them relentlessly. We need to implement a biennial fare and toll increase in 21, 23, or 25, or we need to be identifying and receiving recurring alternative revenue streams in comparable amounts so that we can continue to fund the operations necessary to serve our customers. We got to have affordable wage settlements. And again, we know we need to pay our workers. They deserve to be paid, but it's got to be affordable, and we've got to work together to make sure we can achieve that. We've got to align our service to whatever the new normal is going to be. I don't know what that is. You know, we've seen the McKinsey projections, and it's anywhere between 82 and 91%. Well, just to kind of think about it, if we were to be 15%, so take kind of a midpoint there, if we're 15% down from where we were in 2020's annual budget, so pre-COVID, that's $1 billion right there. And it could be more. I mean, it could be twice that. You know, we just don't know. But we do know that at some point we need to figure out where is our ridership needing us to take them? What are the levels of service that we need to provide to meet the needs? And we need to try to get there ahead of time so that we don't have to do some last minute, desperate, massive layoffs if we can avoid it. So again, we're going to see how ridership progresses. We're going to see what the customers want. We've got a bridge given to us by the federal government through this massive federal infusion of $14.5 billion. But it's up to us to use that bridge to anticipate what the future will be and try to position ourselves so that we can make smart decisions to get there instead of having to do some last-minute, knee-jerk, drastic, horrible, set of decisions. Now, to end on a positive note, look, again, a financial plan is merely a set of assumptions, and we're basing it on assumptions that I've laid out. Things can change. I hope we see an improvement throughout our economy, and I hope we see a continued improvement in ridership. To the extent that happens, the performance will be better. Some of these things may not be necessary. Some of these things can change, and we want to be watching it and be ready for it. But that's the presentation, and Mr. Chairman, I'd be glad to respond to any questions.
Question, Commissioner Jones.
I'm like recurring. When you made these worst-case, projections in terms of having to have more debt, you've already told us that it looks like we're going to have 20% of the expense budget is now going to have to cover debt service. Will that change under this worst-case scenario?
Yeah, it actually in February was even worse than that because we were looking at 22.
Right, I remember.
Like 24%.
Right.
The most recent numbers we have, before you add what we call below-the-line items, which are the additional federal dollars coming in, the deficit financing, and potential fare and toll increases or alternative revenue sources coming in, we're at 20.5% as we get out there. If those are things that I mentioned are included, we're starting to get down to the more reasonable 17, 18%. But I know you look at this every time, and it's the kind of check that we want. But we are going to need, we're not going to have a continuation of the federal dollars, obviously,
right.
But if we don't have either fare revenues or substitute revenues, replacement revenues, you're going to trend back up toward those higher percentages, and that takes away our financing, our operating flexibility, as you know.
And just as a follow-up, obviously, it's my understanding the city and state are capped at 15% of the expense budget. And so we're in territory that other instrumentalities aren't. I don't know.
Yeah, I can't speak for the city and state and
Right.
what they may have by statute or they may have by policy.
Right.
But I do know that we do watch it. We're trying to be careful. We try to be conservative, too, as you and I have
Right.
discussed, on how we project debt service cost, because we just don't want to be surprised with interest rates jumping up and suddenly finding that our capital program is much more expensive than we thought it was going to be. We watch it.
Okay.
Commissioner Cortez Vasquez. Oh, sorry. Commissioner Zuckerman. And testatory next.
Great, thank you. Bob, the Harvard Business School Alum Association had a list of the 100 most impressive people in finance. Jamie Dimon is the #1 in that list. Your name is not in that list, and that is a crime. think that's really upsetting to me. given
They're
what
not
we're-
even a footnote.
Not an alternate. I'm sorry to say that. I have two quick fact questions and an opinion I just want to throw out there. So one, classically you had taught me that 1% fare increase was worth 30 million of income. Here it looks like it's like $50 million now. Is that right? What's the...
Well, what we used to see is a fare and toll increase was about $325 a year. So you could divide that by 4, and so roughly, it was $80 million.
$80 million.
Yeah.
Okay.
Now, again, fares would be, less. So that may be one of the things you were looking
Okay.
at.
Second fact question, just to understand, is you had in this plan, and maybe you can put back up one of the charts, you had service reduction savings happening all the way through the plan period, I think, of some number. I'm looking at the one that's the reverse stacked bar. But you had service reduction still considering out in further years, but with fare increases at the same time. Can you just give us a rough sense of what that service reduction still is, even though, or not, sorry, not the service reduction. What's the McKinsey projection of those riding the rails and the subway when we still have service reduction? What percentage are we at?
We are, when we get to those years, the
Yeah.
out years, we're roughly in an 85% level. What happens is McKinsey now with vaccines
Yeah.
is projecting that everything moves forward
Right.
about a quarter in the projections, but we still end up about the same place.
And just
that
go
we
back,
were.
go back one slide, please. And so the service reduction is just roughly what percentage of our budget?
Well, a budget is right now, it is 18.3.
So
So
what-
you can, if we can go back
Yeah,
one more slide.
you can just put it up.
One more.
Thank
So I'm trying to see that. Our
It's
service
200,
reduction-
200 million it's got.
Yeah.
Okay, so a pretty minor service. Okay, so I guess I just want to say, and I want to thank Larry and the Finance Committee on Monday and for the governor to just be very clear about this service reduction, about the fare increase for 2021. Because I think even before this whole thing happened with COVID, we've all been discussing about where we're reaching the natural end of the rider's ability to pay. I went back to different quotes in board meetings that I made at the 17 and the 19 fare increases, and I always said, look, I'm supportive of them, even though my riders, and being very parochial, are paying the most of anyone in the system. But I'm supportive of them because we all realize it's a system we all have to pay in. Riders, businesses, everyone's got to pay in. But at some point you reach a place where there's not much more to get. And then you take COVID and you ask the question, when does a business that has operating at less than full capacity raise prices? You raise prices typically when demand exceeds capacity, not the other way around. And of course you're pulling this lever because that's the lever you can pull, which is fares. But I think the wisdom of waiting as long as we can, and I'm going to push back even on us having a 22 increase, because I think we're not going to see full employment, we're not going to see that capacity, and anything we can do to increase the riders' willingness to ride, and if price helps do that, God bless, let's do that. So I'm here to help in any way I can, creatively, or in my minor world I live in, lobby to help figure out what alternate revenue sources we can get, because I just don't see how we're going to close this in the back of the riders. The dollar amount is too great. The economy is too fragile to put that on the riders. I just want to say what I think a lot of us are thinking. I'm sure others will say it more eloquently, but that is at least what my perspective is. And Bob, again, thank you for your leadership here.
Thank you.
So I just want to reference one thing, if I could, is that we recognize there's a lot of uncertainty and we have a tough road ahead of us, but I think the board needs to really be clear on what right sizing means. I don't think anybody on this board agrees that reducing service is going to be an ultimate goal, even when we know we're going to struggle to pay for things. I get that. We used the terminology of right sizing maybe 6-8 months ago, and it kind of backfired a bit on us because we realized that the ridership is changing, right? From what I'm hearing in the committee reports, at least for the commuter rails, is, the ridership is increasing in the middle of the day and ridership's increasing on the weekends, yet we don't have the normal peak service that we would have. So that's where we need to reinvent things, but certainly not using the terminology of right sizing without recognizing that it could be cuts. So I just think we really need to be clear on that. If we want people to continue to return, which I believe they will, you know, we have to deliver it in a way where we're not going to reduce service. You want to move it around, but then I don't believe you'd get the savings that you're anticipating in this presentation. So again, I mean, I would certainly continue to advocate for not reducing service in any way, and maybe putting something else at the high end of that list that you can see some of the savings come from in other areas. But just please, I would just really strongly urge that we're honest with the public on what we mean by right sizing, and we avoid any kind of cuts.
Commissioner Albert.
Yeah, I agree with the previous speakers. Bob, am I correct in that there is no recognition or attribution of congestion pricing in the figures you just put forward?
That's correct. And again, because congestion pricing is for capital.
I understand that, but you also have pay-go in here, which takes money from operating and puts it into capital, money that could be used for provision of service.
Yes, because what we were trying to do is we're trying to walk that balance of minimizing the pressure of debt service on the operating budget, so when we can use some of the pay-go. Now, it will also include the sales tax monies and the mansion tax monies that before we bond against them, since it is dedicated, we are committing that to pay-as-you-go. But again, for the 20 to 24 capital program.
All right. Not to make this long-winded, but at the Finance Committee meeting that Commissioner Schwartz chaired the other day, we all discussed alternative sources, and I hope that discussion will continue, because service reduction is not the way to keep riders, attract riders back. Yes, their routines may have changed, and maybe there'll be more at 10 a.m. than there were at 8 a.m. moving forward, and maybe it's not every day of the week, but riders have to have a system they can depend on that will be frequent, reasonably priced, and get them where they need to go with system expansion. So I look forward to those discussions on alternate sources of funding. But as you can well imagine, I am very opposed to reduction in service. Yes, move it around as necessary. If that's what Commissioner Tessitore referred to as right sizing, I'm all for that. Thank you.
Commissioner Lynn.
Thank you, Pat. So here's the problem as I see it. There's no question that deferring the wage increase until at least 2022 or beyond was necessary. The problem, I think, as Bob pointed out from the financial plan, is that it's not sufficient by any means to deal with the overall problems we have. That it is clearly a necessary thing to entice riders back, and appropriate given the federal funding we've gotten and given the better than expected financial response. But it's clearly not sufficient for a whole host of reasons, and some have been mentioned. I think that no matter the fare freeze, if riders and ridership levels are not going to come back, if we don't stop the decline in transit service that we're beginning to see in some of the metrics, the major incidents, the length of the canceled trains, the longer waits. We have an emergency in the need because we have a shortage of staff. And that we need to go all out, and I know that there are plans to go all out, but I think we need to engage a conversation with labor. What do we do about the major hiring shortage that I think labor talked about months ago we may be facing, and I'm not sure that we've acted on quickly enough. That no matter the fare freeze, riders aren't going to come back if we don't step up the capital plan, and I'm looking forward to what Jano's about to say. But we've got to press forward with congestion pricing. I think shame on us when the traffic at the bridges and tunnels are virtually back to normal at this point, while congestion pricing isn't in the forefront of our thinking. And we need it not just for revenues, we need it because of congestion. And I think that I don't see the intensity of looking at congestion pricing on the front burner of the MTA interests. No matter the fare freeze, riders will rebel if we don't control the excessive fare evasion that we're seeing. And if we don't close the slam gates, if we don't regain control, in a very meaningful way, if we meaningfully reduced the fare evasion, we probably could eliminate one of the wage increases that we are, the fare increases that we're, sorry about wage increases. We could eliminate one of the fare increases that we otherwise would have. And I haven't seen that intensity. No matter the fare freeze, we need to renew our focus on management and the IT and recurring overtime abuse by some, but few, at the commuter rails, ineffective supervision that we see in a number of places. We need to do the work together. And I believe, and I know other commissioners feel this way, I think these critical issues should be front and center, should be front burner, and I think a lot of us are suggesting that we ought to be thinking about an August board meeting where we deal with some of these intense issues that are of concern. But I do think, and I know a lot of people, may have other things they're thinking about doing in August, but that I do think that we need an intensity on these and other issues. We need a central focus, and as opposed to looking at thousands of pages of material, we need a central focus on a small number of critical problems, and we need to get going right away. Thanks.
Hey, Bob, there's a lot there, and before I call in the next speaker, I do want to address the congestion pricing issue. There are a few things more important. As you know, it accounts for literally 30% of the capital plan. It's the first time it's being done in the history of the United States. Unfortunately, the prior federal administration cynically delayed it for 2 years. Allison DiSereno and the entire team, working with New York State Department of Transportation and New York City Department of Transportation, are aggressively pushing it forward. And given the fact that it accounts for 30% of the capital plan, there are fewer things that are getting the focus that congestion pricing is. Anybody else? Commissioner Brown.
Yeah, first of all, personally, I have right sizing high on my list of the top 10 weasel words you hear in negotiations, budget discussions. It's clear to me it's an exchange here. The good news for the customer is there's been a fare increase, or the fare freeze, but the bad news is the head times and the crowding on the trains will both work in the opposite direction. So, and I suggest that's an odd way to reattract people to the train. Tell them your head times are going to be greater. Oh, you don't have to pay more, but your head times are going to be greater, and the train's going to be more crowded when you get on, and your fear of COVID will be amplified. So this is what happens when you use weasel words. You're forced into attacking those weasel words and see what's really behind them. And I won't say anything more on that. However, regarding the discussion on congestion pricing, I'd asked last month where we were with congestion pricing. I forget which committee I asked it in. It could have been in the Finance Committee. I don't know. It's the blur of Zoom and perhaps my age to indicate can't really follow this stuff that closely, but that's why I asked follow-up questions on this. So last month I asked you where we were with it, and the answer chiefly involved sort of mechanical process things that you were saying, correct me if I'm wrong, but you had to set up a series of public interfaces. I believe both here in Jersey, every affected party had to be consulted. And that's all well and good, and I'd like to know this month what progress we've made on that. However, the other piece of it is the sort of technical analysis of what the environmental assessment indicators are. So have we completed all of our technical analysis so we're able to present it seems patently obvious that air pollution is going to be diminished by congestion pricing. Beyond that, though, there have to, you need studies to support these things. Have we completed all of those studies? That's the prima cosa that I have for you, the first thing I have for you. But the second thing is really when we were doing, what's the break thing, Neil? Positive train control, which was over a series of 2 years, you presented us with repeated visions of these PowerPoints and spreadsheets. Power corrupts, PowerPoint corrupts absolutely. but it put us in a frame of looking at these things, and each week we would come, not each week, each month we would look at these things with a spreadsheet that had things in red, yellow, and green, so we could see where the problems were. Can we develop some sort of thing like that for congestion pricing? Say, this is where we're being stopped. This is where we cannot proceed. This is where we're proceeding slowly, and this is where we're up to speed and moving ahead. I just suggest we're not approaching the issues in the same way. It's obviously different. You're doing a systemic thing with the congestion pricing, and the other thing was much more of a mechanical thing, and you can maybe put your arms around these things. But what have we done since last month to progress the process, and is our technical analysis ready for prime time?
So Norman, let me address that briefly, and maybe at the August or September meeting, my successor will ask for a presentation on it. Since the last time we met, we've had a number of calls and meetings with U.S. DOT, specifically Federal Highways, in the Washington office and in the local office, which is in Albany. A follow-up meeting has been scheduled for next week. The Biden administration very early on gave us what we had been waiting for 2 years, which is an environmental assessment with robust public outreach. We're in the process of determining what that outreach is. By the way, it includes New York, Connecticut, and New Jersey with respect to environmental justice communities, communities of color, low-income communities, and Native American tribes in all states, as I understand it. And regular updates, which I think we've been doing, I think are appropriate going forward.
But again, what have we done since the last meeting to progress this stuff? I mean, have we set up the robust outreach with the states? I mean,
So that robust outreach has to be approved by the federal regulators. We can't just determine it. And those discussions are underway. We've done all the analysis and preliminary design that we're allowed to do without having the outcome of the environmental assessment. And I think having Allison DiSereno make a presentation at the next meeting would be appropriate. Commissioner Schwartz.
Thank you, Pat. And Bob, thank you and your staff for today's presentation. I look forward, the Finance Committee looks forward, the whole board looks forward to continuing working with you and staff on addressing what I'll call financial challenges. They're just that, they're challenges. We've had many challenges over the years when it comes to financial issues, and this board, as well as the staff, have met each and every one of these challenges. There's very few financial briefings that I can recall over the last 5 years where we're talking about surpluses. We're generally always talking about a deficit, and the issue becomes the size of the deficit, not whether or not we're going to run a deficit. But we've managed them, and we've addressed them, and we've been successful at them. It's always good to get these projections. It's always good to see a plan. It gives us focus of what we need to be thinking about and what we need to be working on. But it's just that. It is a plan. It is a plan that's almost 4 years out. A lot of things change in 4 weeks, let alone 4 years or 4 months. And we've seen this with COVID. But we addressed it, and we met the challenge, and we'll continue to meet challenges as we did with PTC successfully and other things. And so I look forward to working with the Finance Committee and the rest of the board on addressing these challenges. And the last thing I just want to say, and I think one of our speakers said it very eloquently, on a policy level, some of the priorities of the board, not all of them, but clearly are things like transit safety, but it's also transit affordability. And I think that's one of the things that this board wants to work on, is coming up with some long-term recurring solutions to ensure long-term transit affordability. And we really need to rip the Band-Aid off and start from the ground up and coming up with new ways and new ideas on how to provide transit affordability. And what I said at the Finance Committee meeting on Monday is we're going to have a new mayor take office on January 1st. I'm optimistic that this mayor is going to work closely with the governor and this agency on dealing and addressing things like transit affordability. Commissioner Jones raised that there's a lot more that can be done on fair fares. We're not probably even at 30% of eligible people that can do that. I think there are other ways in which we can address, again, working with the governor's office, working with our state legislative partners, and working with the city. So, again, we have challenges. We have to deal with transit safety. We have to deal with our capital program, and we have to deal with other issues like transit reliability and as well transit affordability. So I look forward to rolling up our sleeves as we move into the fall in putting together the 22 operating budget. Thank you.
Didn't get it on. The issue that Bob Lynn raised, which there were groans about, of having an August meeting. It's not only all the things we're talking about, we have a significant leadership change going on here. And I don't think we can take a break this time. And I'm not, my wife says I'm one of the laziest people she knows. But I think a meeting would be appropriate, no matter how summary, as we deal with new leadership and how this board is going to be organized. So I would raise again that August should not be, we shouldn't follow the pattern this time.
So let me make 3 points. One is I respectfully disagree with your wife. I think that your hard work on fair fares, your hard work on fair fares was extraordinary and has helped hundreds of thousands of New Yorkers. I want to add 2 additional points. One is Bob's excellent but rosy in small part presentation did not include the following risk, which is relatively new, which is the ongoing discussions with New Jersey and Connecticut with respect to Carissa and American Rescue Plan funding. And A, thanks to Senator Schumer and the New York delegation for arranging that. B, extraordinary amount of federal funding, as we've all discussed. But C, the stakes in that discussion are $700 million with respect to the MTA. And we shouldn't lose sight of that. And that's why, and with Senator Schumer's support, we've been laser focused on it. The other thing is I want to make sure that we put in context the service reductions that Bob talked about earlier, right? The operating budget is $18 billion. The amount that he is talking about is approximately 1% of the operating budget. It's about $200 million on a budget of $18 billion, point A. Point B is the following. Bob indicated that the ridership levels, for instance, on the subways and buses at that point are going to be in the area of 80 to 85%. So given that ridership, there is not the possibility of having significant service reductions. They will be modest. I think the right-sizing term that Commissioner Brown commented on is actually the right phrase, but it's about 1% of the operating budget, and it's important to have context on that. Anybody else? Commissioner Khaleesi.
So, Pat, thank you for all your service. We appreciate it, and thank you for everything that you do in transit. Sad to see you go. We're talking a lot about right-sizing. We're talking a lot about making sure that people get discounts or not raising tolls, and it's the 31st anniversary of the ADA, and we have to make sure that anything that we do includes people with disabilities, right? It's the 31st anniversary. We're celebrating. It's Disability Pride Month. And we need to make sure that Access-a-Ride is part of those conversations and making sure that we're right-sizing the service and providing the service that people want and need. And we certainly have lots of challenges that are there. And we have to make sure that we hold the federal government accountable to help right-size that as well. But we have to be thinking about it in every step of the way to ensure that that's there. And you heard the problems today. I'm glad to hear that the MTA is working on issues addressing reasonable accommodations for people with disabilities over Zoom for future stuff. So thank you.
It's a first order priority is reflected in the capital plan. And Jano and his team have been executing even during the pandemic and in the aftermath. Anybody else? Commissioner Brown.
Yeah, given our, you and I often have word discussions, but has anyone at this table ever heard right sizing used in reference to anything except a cut? I mean, why don't we call it a cut? And longer head times and more crowded trains, which is what we're going to save money on. Crowded trains save money. Just in the post-COVID period, that's not a way to attract passengers. Now, everybody speaks, they're free to use the language they want to use, and I know you've corrected my language on many times, but, I think it's important for people to focus on what we're really talking about when we say a thing like right sizing. It means a cut. If anyone's ever heard it any different or seen it in print any different, I'd like to see that, and I'll be glad to take a look at it. Now, with regard to the congestion pricing stuff, and to Larry's point that things change quickly, and things are moving very quickly in Washington, we're not going to meet for another 2 months. So, and 2 months is half the way to the mayoral election in November. And the political effects, which I know is not our business, we're supposed to be, I guess, agnostic is what we say on these things. But doesn't this take congestion pricing out of the discussion on the mayoral race from where there should be plenty of support, or at least it would be on the table for the mayoral race? Not that the city has anything to say about it. As long as people in Albany stay solid on this, they won't be denying Governor Cuomo one of his signature victories is the achievement of congestion pricing. Now, why we would want to take the pressure off the electeds in the city before November is, I guess, all this stuff is beyond my job scope.
Anybody else? Commissioner Zuckerman had a comment, but he stepped out momentarily. Should we wrap this up? All right, good. I'm going to ask Jano to present. Neil, you had a comment?
I'm good.
Okay, good. Thank you very much for that.
Okay.
Jano.
It's hard to follow Bob with something of that importance, but fortunately, I have some good news to report. But let me tell you, it's only good news because of the way that our two organizations worked together in the past year during COVID to make sure that the capital program stayed alive. That was financial engineering and at the highest level by Bob and his team. And that's the reason I'm able to give you, I think, what is, although it's not, I don't want to declare victory, but an overall reasonably positive report on the progress of the capital program. So thank you, Bob. When you all adopted the capital program, the legislature and the governor made it official 18 months ago, and almost simultaneously the new C&D organization, Construction Development, here was created. I promised the board that I would give regular high-level updates on our progress, and that's what I'm doing today. C&D was consolidated in January of 2020 following the board's adoption of the ALEX report and the legislature's mandate to integrate a range of MTA functions, including capital planning and construction. This is the so-called transformation process, but it's been finished for some time at C&D. So we went overnight from 130 people doing mega projects to 1,700 people doing all of the projects. This is an image of our first C&D town hall, which was in February, right after consolidation, but it was less than a month before COVID shut us all down, and we had to learn to work remotely. So as a brand new team, as I said, we had to figure out how to get work done in a very different way. And it worked out incredibly well. We issued safe work protocols within days, and we used technology, new apps that the team developed, remote inspections by GoPro and other technological innovations to manage projects and to deal with the COVID-related impacts. So COVID, amazingly, really did not slow down the MTA's active construction projects, and I think we're all very proud of that. And indeed, looking back, the experience of managing 500 projects through this crisis period really brought this team, which was drawn from all the different agencies, and a shout out to the presidents of the operating agencies who made it possible for us to accomplish the consolidation. But this experience did jumpstart C&D's integration. Now, we're still in the process of accomplishing the transformation. I cannot tell you how complicated it is to get everybody on the same personnel system. So they're all coming from different places with different personnel mechanics, and that is still a challenge. But for the purposes of running the projects and managing the jobs, we are truly one team, and that has been true for some time. Even though the state was on pause for more than a year, we developed a strategy to preserve and prioritize the most critical elements of the capital program through the pandemic. We established several priorities, and including high on this list was the existing projects which were fully funded. Bob had money that was devoted to the capital program for the projects that were underway, so we took advantage of that. We used the in-house forces, and tip of the hat to our in-house construction-oriented team. In-house work, obviously we're paying people on payroll, so we worked the heck out of that part of our program. And most important, we made sure that the financial crunch would not impact on the state of good repair work. We knew we could not afford to repeat what happened 10 years ago after the financial crisis of 08-09, and then followed by the Sandy crisis, when state of good repair slipped as a result of financial constraints and other issues. We knew that when COVID finished, we would need a super high functioning system to get our customers back and to preserve the MTA's financial viability. So over a couple of weeks in spring and summer of 2020, two of our senior executives who you know, Frederica Cuenca and Tim Mulligan, who are the head of two of our groups, worked with the operating agencies, conducting workshops to determine which capital projects were most central to safety and to state of good repair. That was what we called the 40% list, the highest priority state of good repair projects. Those are prioritized for award this year and next. We are making sure that the state of good repair projects go first. This really paid off, all of this different work, those categories I mentioned, because we had among the highest level of completions last year that the MTA's ever achieved. We did 11 ADA stations. Commissioner Khaleesi and my friend Q and I spend a lot of time together doing the equivalent of cutting ribbons, because we do have a lot of stations to celebrate. And we also managed to see no delays to the major projects. Think of that. We have East Side Access and Third Track, and Third Track, of course, had a shutdown because of a safety issue, and notwithstanding all that, we've recovered all of the schedule for those major projects. And we did accelerations. Projects we identified that would benefit from low ridership, do more outages, shut down larger portions of stations because we had fewer people in the system. And the governor really pushed us to make sure we took advantage of that opportunity. And I'm happy to announce of the approximately 50 projects we identified for acceleration, all of them have been successfully awarded, and actually 20 of them are already in service. So big success on that front as well. As I said, a lot of the work that we advanced during COVID was actually from the 15 to 19 program, because unlike the 20 to 24 program, which was obviously on pause, literally, 15 to 19 projects were already funded. Now, this goes to an issue that we all are asked about and talk about. I'm often asked about how much of our work is left over from prior programs, and the common criticism is that the MTA's capital program doesn't get the work done in the 5-year period, and it's proof of inefficiency and so on. And some of that is true. But that idea that all of the work should be done in the 5-year period reflects a fundamental misunderstanding that we all need to make clear. The real goal is to have the projects awarded in the 5-year period. It would make no sense to procure all the projects at once and then shut down the whole system to do all the work at once. That would be insane. It would also suppress competition. The contracting community is incapable of bidding on all of the projects all at once. So you need to roll them out through a steady flow of procurements through the 5-year period in order to get competitive bids and in order to manage your outages, to take advantage of piggybacking opportunities as you shut down sections of the system to do work, and then you also do the other projects that require the same shutdowns. We have to preserve adequate service for the customers while we do the work. Today, we are really 5 years into the 15 to 19 program because, as many of you will remember, the 15 to 19 program didn't get funded until 18 months into that official period. So here's the good news. We've awarded 83%. In that 5-year period, we've awarded 83% of the dollars that were part of the 15 to 19 program. And if you discount Penn Access and Second Avenue Subway Phase 2, which didn't have all their money in 15 to 19 and needed to come to get funded in 2020 to 24, if you discount those, we're basically at 90%. So when everybody chews on your legs or our legs about the capital program being delayed, just bear in mind we're at 90%, 15 to 19, 5 years into that. And I think that's not too bad. Could be improved on, but not too bad. So back to the 20 to 24 program. This is a pie chart that you're all familiar with. We showed it to you in February, and you're likely to see it again at future board meetings. What it shows is that after a year when we set aside almost all of the capital program money because we knew we might have to cannibalize it just to keep the lights on, to keep the system running, before we knew the federal funding was coming. After that year, we now have half, basically $30 billion secured. And yes, to the point about central business district tolling, there are lots of good reasons to do central business district tolling. Commissioner Lynn talked about some of them. We should, and we are, I know the team is working to implement it as soon as the federal process will allow. And dare we say it, Pat, that an EA usually takes 18 months. That is the conventional time frame. But what I wanted to impress upon the board is that the fact that 25% of that pie chart is central business district tolling is not inhibiting the capital program. The sources of funding we have now, which are portrayed in green, will carry us through a couple more years of aggressive contract awards. You heard at the CPOC meeting on Monday from Barney Gray, who runs our stations program, about the work going on in stations, including the 8 ADA stations package that is funded from the 2024 program. The funding represented in green can also support the priority state of good repair work I've talked about, including a ton of ADA, it includes a ton of ADA stations, replacement escalators and elevators, signal projects, electric buses, overhauling the Park Avenue Viaduct, a project Kathy and I have been working on intensely, the new Penn Station access, the 4 stations in the Bronx, the completion of third track East Side access. All of that is doable with the money we've identified. We're counting on that central business district tolling, but it is not inhibiting us today. All the work that we're talking about is being done, I believe, more efficiently. Prior to 2019, the state law that was passed in 2019 requiring design-build project delivery for all projects over $25 million. Before that, the MTA had relatively little experience with design-build. Agencies were accustomed to designing a project to 100% and then putting it out for low bid, and then often encountering, cost overruns due to disagreements about the caliber of the design or the constructability of the design. This is what design-build addresses, because the same contractor who's building is really responsible for working all that design out. Now we use design-build for most capital projects, especially the largest value projects, and we're seeing better innovation, fewer cost overruns, and the benefits of design builds, although it's early, I believe are being realized. Where we had existing designs to avoid, and I've worked very closely with Robert Mujica's team at Division of Budget, who are given responsibility for approvals on this, where we had full design already. We didn't hold up projects, to undesign them for design build. In many cases where we looked at the design, we made sure that there were opportunities for innovation, but we used what we called A+B design, which Commissioner Schwartz and others who were in the Cost Containment Committee a couple of years ago recall is where you value not just price, low bid, but also schedule as part of the competition. And we've used that effectively to advance projects that had full design already. And we also implemented a lot of the other recommendations from the Alex Partners report and, if you recall, that Crow forensic audit. We use incentives and penalties on virtually every project. Disputes are now resolved by a neutral party. This always seemed nuts to me that was part of the government approaches, that the government insisted that we alone get to decide disputes. What contractor would agree to do that without throwing a huge premium on top of it? But we fixed that. We're paying people faster, except when my friend Mr. Ferran tells me the cash flow won't allow it. We now almost always try to pay in 15 days rather than 30. It makes a huge difference to contractors, and hopefully over time is starting to deliver better bidding because you're not asking them to be your lender. And we allocate risk to the party that controls that risk. It sounds like an abstract concept, but the bottom line is contractors want to know, can I count on those outages you say you're going to deliver for me? Can I count on the things that you, government, you, MTA, are promising? And that means that we own that risk, that we have to deliver, or else we get, in effect, a penalty. We're also using technology a great deal more. COVID forced us to develop a whole system of electronic bidding. I didn't know this, but the MTA system was you still had to show up on the day with your box of 20 copies of the whole bid document. It was nuts, but we had to do electronic bidding. And thanks to our team, Will Schwartz and others, and the legislature passed, and Governor Cuomo has signed a bill extending and hopefully making permanent electronic bidding for the MTA, which doesn't mean someone can't submit a paper bid, but electronic bids are always accepted. So that's a little bit of what we're doing on those fronts. The Alex report also made the point that design build requires different management practices, and we have made it a central principle of the new organization to have a project CEO for every project who is empowered and held accountable. Again, Larry and others who worked on the Scott Reckler, Commissioner Weisbrod, who worked on cost containment, recall the importance of that issue. We're bundling projects. This is the key idea. If you're doing an outage, find every other project that would benefit from the same outage and organize them into a single project. One model is the 42nd Street connection, where we took 8 separate projects that were all being bid and managed separately, in some of them literally within 50 feet of each other. And we organized it into a single mega project that was managed by one executive who's done a great job. This includes both the work in Grand Central. If you have not been to Grand Central, the subway mezzanine, I hope you will go. It has gotten completely different finishes. We have blown out the size of it. There's much more circulation room. It's a different place. The Times Square shuttle, which is the whole project, got done basically during COVID. So starting in September, and it's going to be right after Labor Day, we're going to reopen the Times Square shuttle, which is now, for the first time, going to be fully ADA accessible. And it is also adjacent to a new entrance to Times Square, the plaza of Times Square, and new elevators as well. So just a project worth looking at, a little model. It saved us a ton of money. And planning. The Crow forensic audit said that we needed to use more different tools and better documentation to do our capital prioritization. Now, you all have heard about EAM, Enterprise Asset Management, which has been underway for some time at the MTA. what we're doing is that we're taking all that data about the condition of assets, the criticality of particular assets or systems to the MTA's service, and using that to prioritize capital projects. I know it sounds like a little obvious, but that incredible load of data had never been integrated into the capital planning process. And I want to shout out to New York City Transit, which has a great EAM system, and we're turning that into the basis of planning and prioritizing. That information, along with what we call the comparative evaluation system for big projects that want to be considered for the next capital program. We have a system, a tool for doing that. That will yield the 20-year needs assessment, which is now going to be a document that's based on data much more than in the past. So finally, and thank you for indulging the length of this, a big thank you to the essential workers. I mean, let's not forget, at day one of New York on pause, the governor said transit construction is essential work. And the men and women who do these projects every day, unionized construction workers, unionized members of our workforce, showed up every day, and we did the work safely. We had very low COVID infection rates. The photo that you see was taken a couple of weeks ago at an event that my team hosted with Gary LaBarbera, the head of the New York Unionized Buildings Trades Group, and the folks who are working on the new Lirr Concourse at Penn Station. This is the project where we're widening that dreaded concourse that runs from 7th to 8th Avenue in the Long Island Railroad section of Penn. We had the event to thank them for what they did during the pandemic. They're the ones who built that new entrance to Penn, which we're all very proud of. And you can see just how this is the area, we're doing this in the area that's going to be the double width of the corridor, which we're taking over. We've demolished what had been the storefronts, pushed them back 30 feet. So you see the benefit that we're going to achieve. Tomorrow I'm going to be out in Elmont to thank the Long Island Trades, similarly. And these, along with our own workers, the flagmen and the people who support capital projects, are the ones who kept this going for months. We can figure out the budgets, we can figure out the systems, but it was human beings who made it possible for the capital program to be maintained and safely, and I just never want to stop thanking them for their service. So thank you.
Thanks, Jano. Questions for Jano? Good.
Wait, one question.
Sorry.
So, Jano, always love your presentations. Thank you. Always mentioning ADA. Thank you. Always on your forefront of your mind. And I know there's some uncertainty with the capital budget, and I thought you said it was funded at 30%. Are we? I thought I heard that.
No, I may have garbled the numbers. It's at 50% is fully in hand. What we're waiting for, but we're counting on it, we're planning for it, we're getting the designs ready, we're scheduling the procurements, is Central Business District tolling, which is $15 billion, the last $10 billion of our transportation revenue bonds, and the money associated with the Second Avenue subway, which we're counting on getting from the federal government. So that project, which has been delayed for so many generations, can be completed. Those are the elements that we're waiting for, but we're planning and assuming that we're going to get them.
So in that planning process, are we, I assume you are, but I'll ask anyway, you're planning for ADA, right? Because that's what you do.
That 70 stations program is included in all that.
Okay, so we're pushing forward on the 70. We're moving forward, just the funding that comes through, but everything's working good on that, and so the commitment is there. It's just a matter of making sure that the funding is in place.
Yes, sir.
So we have to just push harder on congestion pricing.
I don't know if I would say it that way. We are prepared to do all that building when the congestion pricing money shows up, and we're fully planning on it.
Okay, great. Thank you, Jano.
Anybody else? All right, we'll turn to Pat Warren for an update on COVID-19 and safety and security issues.
Thank you, Chairman. As is always, safety's job one. Regarding COVID-19, MTA's daily average number of new cases remains low. It's in the low single digits. That said, we are concerned with the national increase in new cases, and specifically those involving the Delta variant. Vaccination remains the most effective deterrent to the virus, and pursuing the vaccination of our workforce continues as our major safety effort. As of today, we have over 32,700 of our workforce vaccinated through one of our vaccination sites or sponsored programs. Further surveys of our workforce indicate that another 15 to 20% of our workforce have independently taken advantage of the availability of vaccinations at local pharmacies and other city, county, and state facilities, which gives us confidence that between 65 and 70% of our workforce is vaccinated, which is in line with the city and state vaccination statistics. That said, we continue to pursue every avenue to encourage our employees to get vaccinated and support vaccination sites at Penn, Grand Central Terminal, and Livingston Plaza, and family members are also welcome at these sites. We highly encourage everyone to pursue vaccination. As noted last month, national guidance from the CDC regarding mask usage changed, and MTA amended its guidance accordingly. Of importance, the new guidance continues to require wearing of masks in trains, buses, and paratransit vehicles, as well as at indoor stations, with masks no longer required at our outdoor stations or platforms. We continue to monitor mask usage in our system and observed that mask usage rates are in the 80s to 90% range consistently at this point in time. And we thank our riders for their support and respect that they show one another. Unfortunately, this represents a drop from previous months. To promote full mask usage in the system, we are stepping up our enforcement efforts, and these efforts include increased frequency of announcements in stations, trains, and buses regarding the requirements to wear masks, new and increased signage in stations, trains, and buses with the message that masks are still required. With cooperation of the NYPD's Transit Bureau, the MTAPD initiated mask force blitzes at select stations during rush hours to inform customers that masks are still required and offer masks to those who need them. Further, we continue our mask force program with volunteers and continue to offer free masks to those needing them at all of our stations. As is our standard, we continue the many protocols previously established to protect our employees and customers, and this includes the distribution of over 32 million masks at this point and other PPE. Per national and state guidance, we continue daily cleaning and disinfecting of our system and employee workplaces and continue the use of advanced filtration systems. Now let me switch to the topic of security. Having our riders feel safe throughout the subways and bus lines is a vital component, and our train lines, commuter trains, is a vital component to our strategy to bring customers back to the MTA and rejuvenate New York City's economy. To this end, a surge of police and security to the system is having an effect, reducing most index crimes, which is a very welcome trend that we want to continue to see improve as we move through the summer and into the fall. But there is still work to be done, and for example, felony assaults are up 62.3% compared to last June, and overall felonies from all categories are up 2% compared to last June. We are encouraged by the progress towards improved security, which is validated in part by increases in ridership. In further support of improved security, MTA continues aggressive increases in camera installation and monitoring across the system. Over 1,000 cameras have been installed by New York City Transit at 114 stations recently, with the target of completing installation at all subway stations by the end of the summer. MTA has brought 31 more officers into, MTAPD has brought 31 more officers into its ranks, with another 100 plus expected in the next few weeks. The recent increase of security guards has also brought nearly 100 additional security over 100 stations and on trains. Also, the NYPD continues their surge of 1,100 additional officers, and for which we are very, very grateful. This is a promising start, but we are aware that there's always a risk of backsliding. Therefore, these efforts continue to be important. Now, I'm going to turn to Chief McGran in a second, but the Chief O'Reilly from the NYPD reported out at the New York City Transit Committee meeting, and Chief McGran also reported out on railroads at the Railroad Committee. But Chief McGran will give us some update on a little bit of an update on a couple of quality of life issues that we continue to deal with that run the gamut of across the MTA, but are not major index crimes. So Chief McGran, you have the floor.
Thank you, boss. As Mr. Warren indicated, the major crime statistics were discussed earlier this week in committee. However, quality of life conditions are just as important to our customers and workers' experience as the 7 major index crimes. Along those lines, the workplace violence, such as spitting, shoving, and throwing water on employees and also on fellow passengers, remains a concern, particularly on the buses throughout the city. Vandalism is also a major concern for us. Damage to train cars, MetroCard vending machines, and even graffiti affect the workers and the public's experience as far as their feeling of safety and concern, safety and security throughout the system. Finally, trespassing delays trains and customers from getting to their destinations and creates a dangerous situation for our employees and also for the trespasser themselves. Along those lines, the installation of cameras, as the boss indicates, will help us in solving many of these issues. It's also been pointed out that the damage to the MetroCard vending machines affects the amount of people going through the exit gates at the subway stations because they can't purchase their own MetroCards. So these concerns are things that we are trying to address in cooperation with our partners in the NYPD. And thank you once again to Kathy O'Reilly and the Transit Bureau of the NYPD for all their assistance in these matters, as well as to the TBTA Bridge and Tunnel officers that are assisting us with the situation on the buses. And that concludes my report.
Thanks, Chief. Chairman, that concludes.
Thank you, Pat. Any questions for Pat or the chief? All right, good. We will now turn to board action items. We'll start with approval of the minutes, followed by board action items and committee reports. Minutes of the June joint meeting and minutes from each committee have been distributed. They're also on the website. Are there any corrections or omissions? Andrew, we've got yours. If not, I make a motion to approve the minutes. Do I have a second?
I second.
All in favor? Aye. The minutes are approved. Next, we will hear from Mark Young, who will present an administrative action to establish a fare zone for the Belmont Park and Elmont Station on the Long Island Railroad. To be clear, this item is not about changing fares. This is simply to set a Long Island Railroad fare zone for the new Belmont Park Station and to incorporate Elmont Station into a zone based on their geography. Mark.
Thank you, Chairman Foy. Good morning, Commissioners. As the Chairman indicated, this action item seeks to receive board approval for a resolution which would authorize the incorporation of the new Elmont Station and the existing Belmont Park Station into the Long Island Railroad's passenger tariff and fare zone structure. Just a quick background, as many of you know, the south side platform of the new Elmont Station will be opening in the fall, just in time to provide service to UBS Arena. The new station needs to be incorporated into the existing fare zone structure. Because this technically represents a fare change, that's why we're coming to the board for this approval. Geographically, Elmont Station is in Nassau County, and all other Nassau County stations just east of the Queens border are in the existing Zone 4. So its geographic location fits neatly into the existing fare structure, and this action item would place Elmont in Zone 4 with all the similarly situated Nassau County stations. In addition, prior to the pandemic, the Long Island Railroad also provided special service to the Belmont Park Station, and this was limited to NYRA horse racing events. That service hasn't been provided since 2019 due to the pandemic. And as part of that, when customers would utilize that service, they needed to purchase a special ticket as part of a special event package. Service to Belmont Park will now be more frequent to support the UBS Arena events. Since many customers will be arriving to one of the two locations, either Belmont or Elmont, and departing perhaps from the other, it's a customer convenience, and for consistency purposes, it makes sense to have the two stations be in the same fare zone. In addition, Belmont Park Station is also in Nassau County. So this action would also establish Belmont Park as a Zone 4 station. These, you may recall, these proposed changes were covered within the public notice that was approved by the board in November 2020 as part of the 2021 Fair Policy public hearings process. And that concludes my remarks. I'm happy to take any questions if there are any.
Good. Any questions for Mark? Kevin? Second. Second. All in favor? Any opposed? Matter passes. Commissioner Mihaltis is
I'm abstaining.
recusing. Next, we'll turn to our Chief People Officer, Paul Fama, to introduce a pension amendment item. Paul.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good morning. I have an action for approval to amend the MTA's pension plan, which should sound familiar. In May 2020, state law was amended to provide that a death from COVID-19 qualified as an accident and for the associated accidental death benefit for state and city pensions. The state benefit expired 12/21/2020. In July 2020, the MTA Board here adopted the same amendment for MTA pensions. In March of 2021, the state extended this accidental death benefit through 12/31/22 with some small additional changes. This action that we're asking you to approve would conform the MTA pension plans to be consistent with the updated 2021 legislation. We again ask the board to continue to mirror the benefits outlined in this legislation. That concludes my report.
Thank you. Any questions for Paul? I'll make a motion. Do I have a second? All in favor? Aye. Any opposed or abstentions? Thank you all. The railroads met jointly this month, and Commissioner Herman will deliver the report from the railroads. Commissioner.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. The Long Island Railroad Committee and the Metro North Committee met jointly this month, and we report the following. For all of the following actions, the committee voted in favor to recommend the procurements. However, a committee quorum was not present. There are 4 competitive procurements for construction and development this month brought through the Joint Railroad Committee for a total of $187.9 million. I move these procurements.
I second. Any questions? All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Any noes or abstentions? Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Mihaltis.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. The New York City Transit and Bus Committee met on Monday and reports the following. There is one non-competitive procurement for $5.8 million. The committee recommends this procurement, and I move it.
Any questions? I second. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed or abstentions? Matter passes.
There are 2 competitive procurements for a total of $680 million. The committee recommends these procurements, and I move them.
I second. Any questions? All in favor? Aye. Any abstentions or noes? Thank you, Commissioner.
Finally, there are 2 procurements for construction and development. Both are ratifications for the total amount of $7.7 million. The committee recommends these procurements, and I move them.
I second. Any questions? All in favor? Aye. Any noes or abstentions? Thank you. Matter passes.
This concludes the Transit Committee report, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Commissioner. Next report is from the B&T Committee from Commissioner Lacewell.
Mr. Chairman, the Bridges and Tunnels Committee met on Monday and reports the following. There was a single action. The committee voted in favor to recommend the procurement. However, a quorum was not present at that time. The single construction and development procurement action totals $7.5 million, and I move this procurement.
I second the motion. Any questions? All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Any noes or abstentions? Thank you, Commissioner.
That concludes the report.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Schwartz.
Mr. Chairman, the Finance Committee met on Monday and reports on the following. There are 2 action items this month. The first item seeks board authorization regarding refinancing of the Empire State Development's TIFIA loan for Moynihan Station Development Project. The second item is TBTA sales tax revenue obligation resolution for submission to the Capital Program Review Board. The committee recommends these items, and I move them.
Thank you. Commissioner Lacewell and I are both going to recuse on this matter, so I'll ask for a second for someone else.
I second.
Sorry? Yeah, on the ESD matter. Thank you, counsel.
I second, Pat.
Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstain on the ESD matter, or same with respect to Commissioner Lacewell. Commissioner.
There are 4 competitive procurements this month for a total of $153 million. The committee recommends these procurements, and I move them.
I second. Any questions on this? All in favor? Aye. Any noes or abstentions? Thank you.
There are 8 real estate action items for this month described on pages 201 through 220 of the board book distributed for this meeting. The committee recommends these real estate items, and I move them.
I second. Any questions? All in favor? Aye. Any noes? Sorry?
No.
Oh, any noes or abstentions? Matter passes. Thank you.
This concludes the Finance Committee report.
Thank you, Commissioner. This morning, I chaired the Safety Committee and report the following. There's one action item for board approval. The item required by the Federal Transit Administration and submitted in coordination with the MTA Chief Safety Officer and New York City Transit is the Subways and Buses Public Transportation Agency plans. The committee recommends this action, and I move it. Do I have a second?
I second, Pat.
All in favor? Aye. Any opposed or abstentions? Thank you. So before we adjourn, I'm just going to make a couple of brief comments. The meeting has gone on for a while, and I'll be brief. As you know, this is my last MTA board meeting as chairman and CEO. In September, I'll be moving on to lead the Empire State Development Corporation and working with Steve Cohen and the people there. I want to thank Governor Cuomo for the opportunity to serve at the Port Authority and at the MTA. It's been an extraordinary honor to lead this critical agency, especially at this period of time, and to work with this dedicated board and the smart, tireless, and heroic staff to serve the region and my fellow New Yorkers these last 4 years. I want to thank my colleagues on the board, both present and former commissioners who have moved on. I want to thank you for your service, your time, and thoughtful contributions on matters large and small over the years. Clearly, we've not agreed on everything. That would be impossible to expect, but it's always clear that every one of you has focused on what's important, which is that we serve as serious and careful stewards of the MTA as we shape the future of public transportation in the region. Your dedication and service is valued and appreciated. The meetings are frequently lively and spirited with robust discussion and comments from our customers, the public. I want to tell customers, whether comments are made virtually or in person as they were today for the first time in 15 or 16 months. We listen carefully to your comments, and the same is true with respect to public hearings when we have those. We listen carefully. We discuss them, and you all have had an impact in any number of ways. We appreciate your commitment to improving the MTA. I'm proud to have led the agency at a time when New Yorkers needed the MTA more than ever. Doctors, nurses, police officers, firefighters, sanitation workers, grocery and delivery workers, and clearly our own transit heroes in the depths of the pandemic. The MTA was the circulatory system that carried all of these heroic essential workers and first responders to the front lines so that they could carry all of us through the crisis. Our tireless workforce, the heroes moving heroes, are the definition of New York tough and represent the best of public service. During these uncertain times, we did everything we could every day and every night to safeguard the health of our customers and employees. I want to thank Pat Warren, an unsung hero, for spearheading our nation and industry-leading pandemic response and adapting it and changing it and innovating throughout. Also, Dr. Luisi, Carl Heyman, and their teams who helped set up safe protocols and developed innovative programs that were followed around the nation and around the world, from diagnostic testing to vaccinations, to support our employees and protect the health of employees and customers. Every day, I've been humbled by the hard work and dedication shown by my colleagues at every level of the organization. You all showed up every day, day in and day out, night in and night out, and it's thanks to you that we faced the greatest challenge in MTA history, frankly, one of the greatest challenges in the history of the United States, and came out rising to recovery on the other side. This agency has weathered worse days, the Great Depression, the 1980s fiscal crisis, polio, the 1918, 1990, 19 pandemic, Superstorm Sandy, the Great Recession, and I had full confidence that we would pull together and pull the region through, and that's exactly what happened. The same goes for the brave men and women of the MTA Police Department and the NYPD's Transit Bureau, led by Chief McGran and Chief O'Reilly. Policing is a profession that is difficult and perilous at the best of times, and the pandemic was unquestionably one of the most challenging times. We all appreciate your work to keep our customers and employees safe. It was wonderful to see and participate with all our MTA heroes rightfully recognized at the Hometown Heroes Ticker Tape Parade earlier this month. Riding the 1903 wooden train with colleagues across the agency was a tremendously moving moment, and it highlighted in sharp relief the service and sacrifice of the 168 members of the MTA family who we lost to COVID. Each loss matters and every loss stings. My heart goes out to each of the families and the deep grief and heartbreak they are continuing to suffer. While nothing can bring these heroes back, I'm proud the MTA provided their families with a measure of financial security after their loss, with a first-in-the-nation COVID family benefits program. It was the right thing to do, and I want to acknowledge the work and partnership of Tony Utano and Anita Miller, who were all instrumental in making it happen. Thank you, too, to Sarah Feinberg's leadership and the hard work of Monica Murray and all those from the MTA who supported these families after their loss. It's an understatement to say that we were battle-tested time and time again in the last 16, 17 months. We weathered a historic overnight shutdown of the subways, the system's first ever closure in 116 years, and brought it back when the time was right. Shutting down the system was a fraught and difficult decision to make, but it was the right one under the circumstances. And it was executed flawlessly by Sarah Feinberg, Sally Lirr, Frank Giesecke, Demetrius Critchlow, and the team at Transit from night one in May 2020 to the gradual opening and ultimately the return of 24/7 service. And it was Craig Cipriano and the team at Buses working with Judy McLean and our service planners who smartly enhanced bus service when it was needed, when and where it was needed. And Sarah Meyer's customer team who made sure our riders always knew how to get safely to where they needed to go. I want to recognize and thank each of the agency presidents for their extraordinary work. Jano at C&D, Kathy Rinaldi at Metro North, Phil Eng at the Long Island Railroad, Danny DiCrescenzo at Bridges and Tunnels, who worked tirelessly together to lead our operating agencies through these uncharted waters with compassion, innovation, and tenacity. Word about federal funding and COVID. We should never forget that the MTA faced financial Armageddon just months ago. An unprecedented fiscal tsunami as ridership cratered to never-before lows and our budget literally fell off a cliff. The impact of the pandemic was as destructive as a five-alarm fire, more severe even than the Great Depression. Thankfully, the federal government, led by Senate Majority Leader Schumer and the entire New York delegation, led by Chair Lowy and Congressman Jeffries and the entire delegation, came through with 3 separate rounds of federal COVID funding totaling an extraordinary $14.5 billion. This desperately needed aid helped us to avoid the unthinkable slashing service and laying off, not right-sizing, Commissioner Brown, slashing, and laying off nearly 10,000 of our colleagues. Obtaining this relief package is one of the signature accomplishments of the last few years, given that it was a matter of survival for the MTA. And I want to thank the hard and smart work of our team, Jano, Sarah, Kyla Hines, Naomi Rennick, Abby Collins, Ken Lovett, and Tim Minton in creating a national coalition that highlighted just how critical transit is to the communities that it serves. I also want to thank our partners here in the region who rallied behind our cause, including labor leaders John Samuelson, Tony Utano, Anthony Simon, Chris Silvera, Vinnie Modafieri, and their other labor brothers and sisters. Also, the New York business and real estate communities, not-for-profits, and advocacy organizations who helped drive home the impact of transit for the economy, and for the community. And through this long advocacy campaign, I want to especially thank Bob Foran, David Keller, Jay Patel, Mark Young, Pat McCoy, and the entire team for their work. The $14.5 billion in aid was the result of a lengthy campaign at the consummation of which was never certain. This could have gone the other way and we'd be having an entirely different board meeting today. There were many difficult moments and months when we had to plan for the worst and push to be innovative with the financing tools available to us. Bob led through it all with a steady and intelligent calm. He's truly one of the most able public sector CFOs in the country, and the agency is lucky to have him. Pandemic aside, we've achieved a tremendous amount together over the last few years, and I know the agency is in steady hands of capable leaders going forward. I want to note a few highlights in particular. First, thanks to the support of the governor and the state legislative leaders for recognizing the importance of reinvesting in our system in approving the agency's historic 2020 to 24 capital program and enacting central business district tolling legislation to fund a significant portion of it. Credit to Jano, John McCarthy, Mark Roach, Tim Mulligan, Evan Iceland, Steve Plachaki, and Frederica Cuenca, and the entire C&D team for advancing the program and delivering on our commitments and continuing to do so safely through the pandemic. Shout out to Allison DiSereno as well for her smart, diligent, and creative leadership of the CBDT program. That's hard to say. She's laser focused on advancing this project quickly and responsibly and delivering a solid outcome for our agency and the region. She's a rock star. Of course, the capital program generates investments in small businesses through the state and helps create good paying jobs. Thanks to Michael Gardner, who was recently named Top Diversity and Inclusion Officer by Cranes, an honor well deserved. The MTA is consistently ranked #1 in dollars paid to New York State certified MWBEs with extraordinary number, over $900 million in the latest state fiscal year. In the last 18 months, we've welcomed I'm almost done. We've welcomed the number of new leaders as well. Each of them hit their stride and led to their departments capably throughout this past year, and I know they'll continue that going forward. Paul Fama, Ralph Portnoy, Kavesh Ayer, Mark Dowd, Quamel Arroyo. Thanks to Anthony McCord and Weil Hibry and the team for their energy and commitment to helping improve the MTA. Lastly, I want to recognize Al Petray and Wayne Leiden, who are modernizing our fair payment system with Omni. Obviously, Al has retired recently. Tom Savio with the smart support from Michelle Woods on timekeeping modernization. Tariq Habib and the team on cybersecurity, who have aggressively defended the MTA from cyber attacks. Lastly, Tom Quigley, our esteemed general counsel to my right, who's been a smart and steadfast partner, giving wise, practical advice in steering this agency on the same course as we navigated all issues large and small. Finally, my incomparable chief of staff, Annie Zhu, who also departs the MTA next week. Annie's been an invaluable advisor from day one, serving as a critical sounding board and counselor at every step. Thank you, Annie, for everything, and thank you all. Thank you. Thanks. Thank you. Commissioner Law.
Hey, Pat. I'm not going to pretend to speak on behalf of all 21 of us, but I'm sure you probably don't want 21 speeches. So I'll try to speak on behalf of...
I think that'd be in the public interest to not have 21.
I'll try to just say a couple words on behalf of as many of us who, want to be included in this. But really want to thank you for everything you've done. We go back about 17 years. Always been impressed with every hat you've worn. But really impressed over the last couple of years with what you've done here at the MTA, especially last year. We rightfully talk about all the heroes, but you were certainly one of those heroes, because while many people left for the out east or went upstate, you stayed here in the city. You showed up at this office every day, steering the ship, and you did a terrific job. You also really did a terrific job working with the governor and Senator Schumer and our labor partners in getting the federal monies we got. And that wouldn't have happened really without your heroic efforts on that. And as you know, I ran a state public authority once, and I know at times it feels thankless, especially when you put in 16 hours a day all the time. But please know we're very thankful for everything you did.
Thank you, Kevin. Thanks for the kind words. Commissioner Albert.
Yeah, not to prolong this, but I wanted to thank you for your steady, serious stewardship with a sense of humor, which I think is very important these days, through what is generally recognized as the MTA's most perilous time. You were there. You were the good face to have for the MTA to the public. I'd also like to thank you for not treating non-voting members as second-class citizens. I've always felt equal. I really appreciate that. And we all wish you the best in your next endeavors. And stay in touch.
Thank you, Andrew. I appreciate it. I think it's in the public interest that we now make a motion to adjourn. I move it. Second, adjourn. Thank you all. All right, great. So let me start with the service issue. On subways and buses, we're providing nominally 100% on subways and buses. We just increased service on Metro North. Happy to do that. We increased service on the Long Island Railroad not that long ago. I think we've also said that any service adjustments going forward are going to be increases in service. And the discussion today about the 2023-2024, which is a couple of years away, was Bob, as he does in February and July and then in November, presenting options, including options with respect to fares or not, and other things. And with that, I'm happy to take your questions.
David Meyer, The New York Post.
Hey, Pat. Sorry to see you go. My first question, or my only question today, is about inflation. Inflation is obviously happening. Wages are increasing. The MTA's costs are increasing. Given those two things happening at once, isn't it irresponsible to not raise fares this year? Think about the 1970s where the MTA didn't raise fares at all and inflation skyrocketed, really hurt us here. So why shouldn't we be raising fares given all this money in people's pocketbooks?
So, David, first, President Biden and the administration are taking the position, which makes sense to me, that the inflation that we're seeing is transitory. It's a result of a robust economy coming out of a pandemic, point one. Point two, the current inflation's had no impact on MTA wages because we've got a contract with the TWU and contracts at various stages with other organizations. Obviously, if there was a significant lasting spike in inflation that lasted for months and years, obviously it would be a factor for every business, public agency, government in the nation, but we're not at that point. Danielle?
Hi, Pat. Should we be concerned that there hasn't been a successor named yet, and can you give any information on the transition plan?
Yeah, look, the governor sent legislation to Albany, which was approved by the Assembly before they left. We are hopeful that the Senate will take up the bifurcation bill and the confirmations, and that's a matter that I'm going to leave to the governor's office and the legislature. Clayton.
Hey, Pat, I have two questions. First one's for you, second one's for Jano. First question, straightforward. What do you hope your legacy is as chairman of the MTA during your time here?
Well, look, the history is going to be written by others. I talked today about the pandemic is the most significant thing that's ever affected the MTA. That's not my opinion. The data suggested, right? You know, a 95% decline in subway ridership in March and April of 2020, compared to the worst days of the Great Depression, a 13% and obviously a corresponding decrease in our revenues. The work of the agency at every level, agency presidents, construction and development, our heroic frontline workers, I think it's an extraordinary chapter in the MTA's history, and I'm proud to have played a part in that with my colleagues who are, you know, in the room and were at the table, at the board table today, but together with tens of thousands of transit workers, Long Island Railroad, Metro North, Bridge and Tunnel employees who acted heroically.
Cool. And then just one for Jano, if he can step up. Hi, Jano. The bifurcation bill still remains murky. You would be, if it does pass, the CEO of the MTA. If it doesn't pass, would you accept a position as acting chairman and CEO until next year, at which time the bifurcation bill may be passed?
With all due respect, Clayton, I don't want to be evasive, but I'm definitely not going to engage in hypotheticals. The governor's made a case that it is both effective and timely that we separate these two jobs. There's more than enough work to go around, we all know. In Sarah Feinberg, you have a historic glass breaker, potentially, as the first woman chair of the MTA, and she is she was the Federal Railroad Administrator under Obama. She was a board member of the MTA, and she ran the New York City Transit during its most dramatic and challenging period. That's somebody with real experience to lead our board in an incredibly challenging time. So I'm not going to comment on a hypothetical, but I will say I really do hope that the Senate comes back and takes up the governor's proposal.
But you're not commenting on whether you would serve in both in the combined role as it exists.
I won't say I reject the premise of the question, because that's, but I'm not going to comment on a hypothetical. Yeah.
We're going to go to Zoom. Kevin Duggan from AM New York has a question. Kevin. Just got to hit that unmute button, Kevin, for all of us in the room to hear you.
Can you hear me?
We can now.
Great. Thanks for taking my question. I guess this one is probably for Pat Warren. He mentioned the vaccination rates among MTA employees. I was wondering if you could provide those specifically for MTA PD.
I can tell you the vaccination rates for all of MTA right now. I don't have them broken out for the MTA PD, and I'm not sure where that falls in HIPAA stuff that we should be talking about right now.
Do you have those numbers available? Like, do you break them out like that?
I think it's asked and answered. Pat, you have another question here. Jose Martinez, go ahead.
Hi, Pat. And this one could be for Mr. DiCrescenzo as well, if he's with us today. Is there concern at the MTA over the levels of traffic returning to close to pre-pandemic levels in terms of traffic that it puts on the road? It's returned at a lot higher, faster rate than any other service in the MTA.
So, Jose, I'd say a couple things. One is it is as clear a validation as there ever will be respecting the need for congestion pricing in New York, which is a fundamental part of the financing plan for the capital plan. Point one. Point two, as office workers continue to return to their offices in all 5 boroughs, and some of them drive, the pressure on bridges and tunnels will increase, which again, I think is clear validation and affirmation of the need for congestion pricing. So obviously we are concerned about it. We're doing everything we can to drive customers, former customers, new customers to mass transit, and we're going to continue to do that.
And if I may follow up just
Please.
briefly, has there been any significant change in trends in terms of hours that people are using the bridges and tunnels?
Danny, do you want to speak to that?
Nothing significant. We're still seeing a push during the normal rush hours, although be it the new users or the users of the bridges and tunnels are not the Monday to Friday 9 to 5 type of congestion that you used to see. So the rush hours are there, meaning traffic builds up during the normal times, but usually they cut off a little earlier, well, maybe last a little longer into the evening. Right now we're in the summertime traffic pattern, so we see the push on normal Thursdays and Fridays for the weekend. So we're going to continue to watch it very closely.
Got a question from Christina Fan. CBS 2 is on the Zoom today. Christina.
Hey, thank you so much for taking my question. Just had a quick question about subway crime. So recently there were some high-profile cases, including a mother that was shoved down the Canal Street subway steps during an attempted robbery. But overall, crime is down. There's been a recent drop in assault. So I wanted to ask, how well do you think the increased police presence has been? What kind of effect has it had? And what else do you think can be done to address this?
So let me just say one thing, and I'll turn it over to Sarah Feinberg. We are grateful for the city's commitment of additional police officers. I think the decline in crime, while it's hard to attribute it directly, surely contributes to the reduction in crimes. And Sarah, your thoughts?
Hi, sorry for the delay. I couldn't unmute myself. Look, I think, thanks for the question. I think there's no question that the added police assistance from NYPD has had an impact. This was a conversation that was going on for months, between ourselves and NYPD, ourselves in the city. And, we saw those sort of small and temporary upticks in the number of police officers that were being added to the system. And then, eventually sort of hit that tipping point where the mayor, added additional police officers. And I think it was 2 board meetings ago that Chief O'Reilly acknowledged that there were about 1,100 additional police officers in the system. And really at that point, we immediately saw numbers go down. Obviously, the heartbreaking story that you're referring to that happened at the Canal Street station is just devastating. And we, continue to see issues that occur in the system that are unacceptable and that we're concerned about. But, that 1,100 additional police officers, in my opinion, had an immediate impact. We've continued to have this sort of all of the above approach to dealing with this issue in the subway system and on buses. Obviously, we wanted the added police presence from the NYPD, but we've also had an added police presence from the MTA police. They've surged into the subway system more than they ever have previously. We've added the security contractors. But, I think the cameras installation and our effort to be really aggressive at getting those cameras up on platforms and stations has been incredibly helpful as well. We are on track to meet our target of having every single station have cameras by the end of the summer. And I'm hugely grateful to the station's maintenance team and to the security team for being able to meet that. I think increasingly it has become known that if you are engaged in an incident in one of our stations, you are highly likely to be caught on camera. And I think for those of you who have reported on this for quite some time, when the police, when the NYPD have a clear image of someone's face who they're looking for because they committed an incident, there's a pretty quick turnaround on finding that person. And so I am hopeful, and I believe that is increasingly becoming something that's known in our system.
All right, from CBS 2 to Fox 5, Antoine Lewis is sitting right there.
Pat, 2 quick questions for you. First is, can you tell us where things stand with hiring more people now that the freeze has been lifted? And then I just have a quick second.
Yeah, hiring began months ago, and again, I'll defer to Sarah, but when we had some certainty that we were going to get federal funding, we began to hire. Sarah?
Thank you. So Pat's exactly right. The hiring freeze that impacted the entire agency, including the operational forces, was lifted some time ago, and we've been hiring at as quick a clip as we possibly can, and since that time. And we, knew going into the hiring freeze that it would be difficult to dig out of, and that we would need to be aggressive about how we were thinking about bringing on additional workers and how we were training them. And so we've been working for many weeks at this point about, how big can those class sizes be? Is there anything that we can do to make sure that people are trained properly and that we're not cutting any corners on safety, but that we're moving people through as quickly as possible. And hats off to the subways team and the buses team for thinking through that really aggressively. I will say that one thing that we are finding is that we are just like every other industry that you're reading about in the news that is having trouble recruiting people to the same degree that we had ease prior. So, for reasons that I think are probably personal and economic, but certainly personal. I don't think that potential transit workers are the only folks who have taken a hard look at their lives over the last year and a half and have wondered if they want to spend more time with their family or move, change careers or change jobs. We are having more trouble recruiting than we have in the past. So as we go through the list and invite people to join a class of bus operators or train operators or conductors, we are not hitting the same numbers that we have in the past. For now, it feels anecdotal, and we're working on getting hard numbers on that. But I think that is due both to what people have been through in the last year and a half, and frankly, how people are thinking about their life and their career in a time of COVID. But again, we are moving aggressively to bring on folks as quickly as we possibly can. I also just, while we're on this topic, it's a little off topic, but it's related. I wanted to comment on some of the issues we're seeing on the service front due to crew shortages. And look, we've been trying to be very transparent and make sure that we are very open with folks about the kind of service that we're able to provide at this moment. And I think right now in particular, as folks are thinking about COVID, obviously they want as much service as possible. And we've been trying to provide that. And I think we're doing quite a good job. When you look back historically at the kind of service that we're providing now and that we've been providing over the last couple of years, we are providing as much service or more and good service than we were able to do in certainly in 2018 and in 2019. The comparison to 2020 is a little off because there were so few riders in the system that service was although sadly trains were quite empty, service was quite good because you didn't have any of the delays that come along with ridership going up. And so, I'm quite proud of the service that we've been providing this year, even with crew shortages. We've had some signaling issues, we've had crew shortage issues, but, generally we are providing quite good service. And, that does not mean that there are not frustrating moments on the platform. There are, and I feel the pain of folks who are standing on a hot platform waiting on a train and are expecting a headway of 3 minutes and are experiencing a headway of 5 minutes or 6 minutes. And I've been there, and I think everyone in the room there has been there. We all use the system all the time and have experienced it ourselves. But I also just want to make sure we're doing a reality check on the service that we're providing, because we are the subways team and the buses team every day in and day out. I get reports on how rush hour went, how the peaks went, and what service was like. And day in and day out, they are flexing headways where needed. They're making sure they're calling people in for overtime, and they are providing really, really good service. I'm quite proud of the team.
You're good. Let's just go across town to Eyewitness News on the west side over there, WABC's NJ Perkins.
Thanks, Tim. Pat, when your CFO talks about ridership, that 15 to 20% of riders may not return to the system, when the solution to a revenue shortfall could involve service cuts, what do you say to riders now, subways and commuter rail, who are concerned that the transit system may never be the same?
Well, look, NJ, I'm an optimist. I'm a bull on New York State, on New York City, and the MTA. We've gone through the most traumatic episode, I think, in the nation's history in the continental United States, as opposed to foreign wars, and I think the most abrupt and substantial change in human behavior on a mass basis ever. Naturally, it's going to take some period of time to recover from that, and recovering we are. Ridership is up compared to the worst days of the pandemic. We've got a long way to go to get to 2019 ridership levels. And what Bob Foran is doing is what he's done every 3 months for the 10 or so years that he's been CFO, is reporting honestly and transparently to the board and the public and presenting options. And the service changes that were, on the sheet they're in 2023 and 2024. That's a long way away, A. B, it's not actions that we want to take. And C, the reductions are relatively modest. On an $18 billion budget, it would account for about a 1% reduction. We are running, as Sarah and I just said, substantial service on subways and buses, 100%, and significantly increased on Metro North and Long Island Railroad, and our expectation is the next service moves are going to be increases.
Let's go back to the Zoom.
Sure.
CBS 880's Steve Burns, in honor of your last appearance here in this podium, has moved inside. He's going to be fully focused in this news conference. Steve, go ahead.
Yes, roaring thunderstorm outside is the main reason. While I have a question on congestion pricing, but while we're talking about subway service, I'll mention that first. Is there any fear that the current challenges we're seeing with staffing shortages is being a hindrance to bringing ridership up? I mean, we talk about the fare freeze as an effort to get riders back, but if riders go and venture back into the system once and they see that there's an unexpected wait for a train and they'd rather not deal with that, do we see some of these service problems being a hindrance to bringing riders back to a level where you'd like them to be?
I don't. We're providing robust service for a significantly decreased ridership. We've been hiring since the first quarter when the hiring freeze was lifted, and we're going to continue, as Sarah just described, to aggressively hire and do whatever we can to get people on board in a challenging environment.
Yeah, and if I can just jump in on that, Pat, for a second. Between Monday and today, I asked the Subways team to just pull for me to separate out some of the service issues that we're having, so we're not just looking at everything as if looking at the service as if without looking at what the specific causes of service issues are. And so when you separate out, for example, the service issues that we're having related just to what I refer to as CBTC growing pains. So, the issue of that we are installing the first interoperable CBTC system in the country, at least that I'm aware of. And there have been some growing pains that have come along with that. You separate that out from other sort of typical signaling issues, if you separate that out from crew shortage issues, on average, again, and this is not to downplay the pain on the platform, as I would refer to it, but on average, most riders or all riders are experiencing 1 to 1.5 minutes of delay based on, just due to crew shortages. So again, it's frustrating. It's 8 o'clock in the morning. It feels like it's 100 degrees outside. You're trying to get to work. The train pulls out of the station as you arrive. You expect your headway to be 3 minutes. Your headway is 4.5 minutes. That's not to say that it's not frustrating. It certainly is. But that just gives you a little bit more in terms of specifics on the kind of service issues that we're seeing related to crew shortages. And I hope that's helpful.
It is. Thank you. And I just wanted to follow up on congestion pricing as well. I think a lot of the dialogue, just kind of searching for what the next step is to kind of nail down what the timeline is. We know there has to be the outreach, but I think the questions from the mayor, from other people, are just kind of looking at, what kind of concrete timeline do we have to get this underway? And then kind of sub-question to that, what would you say to the politicians and critics in New Jersey who are looking to stop this at all costs?
Well, look, with respect to the New Jersey question, we understand their concerns. The robust public outreach process that we are going to participate in and lead in will include our colleagues and customers and others in New Jersey and in Connecticut. There'll be a full airing of those issues. With respect to the environmental assessment process, this is in some ways a normal environmental assessment and in some ways not, right? It is the first congestion pricing project in the history of the United States. And the public outreach process has to be robust. We've got to be comfortable with it. Our federal colleagues have to be as well. And every day, Allison DiSereno and the team are working as hard as possible, both before and after we got advice from the Biden administration, and since we got that good news from the Biden administration to move the project forward, we're going to continue to do that.
Let's come down here to Dave Colon with Streets Blog. The Knicks were so April. He's rocking Pelicans today.
I was expecting a Fear of the Deer shirt, Dave.
Everybody said that. I wish I owned a single Bucks jersey. Now they're going to be more expensive at the thrift shop. I had two questions. I guess I can just do one and get your answer on the other. One is in the course of talking about the fare hikes and whether or not to do them and kind of the financial future of the MTA, there was a lot of talk about we have to find new funding sources. We have to work with the city. We have to work with the state. We have to figure out ways to get more money. Currently, you are on your way to your next job. We don't know who's going to be taking over for you yet. So who is going to be making this case to legislators about, why there need to be new funding sources, and what is the case going to be to do that? That's the first question.
Well, look, the case is going to be the typical case that mass transit in New York is fundamental to the region's health from a financial point of view, an economic point of view, a transportation point of view, a social point of view, a social equity point of view. That continues to be the case, even more so following the pandemic. I think that given the legislature and the governor's support in 2019 of congestion pricing, that is the view of the governor and the legislature in Albany. And that is, that's the that is the belief of decision makers, legislators, and policymakers in the state.
And then my second one is, it sounds kind of like we're back to the old congestion pricing debate, talking point, what have you, where we're saying, well, now we're waiting on the federal government to give us clearance. You said the outreach parameters for these robust outreach has to be determined and approved by the federal government.
So Dave,
what is being said to them to kind of hurry it up?
But that's not what we said. We're not waiting on the federal government. We're working with the federal government to make sure that the public outreach process satisfies statute and regulation, A, and B, is sufficient to inform all affected and interested parties, including from an environmental justice point of view, from a social equity point of view, from a transportation point of view, business groups, labor groups, real estate groups, advocates, et cetera. It's not a question of waiting on, we're working with.
Well, are you telling them that, it's very important to kind of hurry up on their question of whether or not it, suits their idea of it?
Yeah, look, and I think the Biden administration in Washington made that clear with making a decision in a couple of months where the prior administration took a couple of years to do nothing. And they told us in a couple of months it's an environmental assessment with a robust public outreach, and that's what we're working on every day.
Let's stay here with Michelle Caskey from Bloomberg. Michelle.
Hey, Pat, thank you for your service and congrats on your tenure. I have a question, though, I think might be more for Bob Foran, but I'm wondering, again, with the issue of inflation and interest rates increasing, what are you guys doing with your debt portfolio? What does it mean for the variable rate debt that you hold? What does it mean for your swap portfolio?
So let me just make 2 points before I turn it over to Bob. One is interest rates are down this week substantially, right? B, while inflation is a concern, the administration in Washington believes it's a transitory issue. I don't believe that the inflation spike has had a material impact on the $17 billion plus budget of the MTA. That could certainly change in the months and years ahead, and I'll turn it over to Bob.
So let me just talk specifically. You know that we're very conservative when we estimate interest rates in the future. We use forward calendars. We also use a very wide margin for our variable rate because we just don't want to be surprised, and we want to make sure that when we put something in for our debt-funded capital program, that in and of itself is not going to be a future surprise. So we're very careful in what we do there. So I would just say we have a very professional debt management group under Pat McCoy. They look at all opportunities for us. If we see an opportunity to reduce cost either on a new money issue by clever structuring or to do a refinancing, restructuring, they're going to take advantage of that. So I think you're wise to always look to the debt portfolio because that is something that does affect operating budgets, but we're on top of it and we pay careful attention to it and we try to be conservative in our approach.
So no major changes as of now?
No.
Okay, thanks.
All right, let's stay with finance. Paul Burton from the Bond Buyer is coming to us on Zoom. Paul, good afternoon. Just unmute yourself. There you go.
There you go. Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yes, Paul.
Good, good.
Pat, what would you consider the most rewarding part of your chairmanship, and what would you consider the most frustrating?
Look, I think I'm not sure I'd say it the most rewarding, but I think the most impactful and inspiring was the reaction of the MTA at every level, especially the operating folks, in responding day after day in a heroic manner to the pandemic. That was inspiring. It was extraordinarily important to New York, to New Yorkers, to first responders and essential employees, and that was inspiring. I think the most frustrating was frankly, the Trump administration's, in my mind, cynical stopping work on congestion pricing at the department was one, and second, the issues related to the second and third rounds of funding. Fortunately, the new administration, Senate Majority Leader Schumer, the New York congressional delegation, were able to fight their way through that and deliver a total of $14.5 billion. So that'd be my response to that question, Paul.
And the last question of the FOI era is going to come from Alfonso Castillo, your home country, Long Island, Newsday. Alfonso.
Hi, Pat.
Alfonso.
On behalf of Long Islanders, thank you for your service, and best of luck in your new gig. A couple things. First, on this issue of right-sizing service, we know the Long Island Railroad did that already, tried to do it further earlier this year. There was a big backlash by riders, and they ended up rolling back service. You said that the next change would probably be an increase in service. Is that to say that they wouldn't be subject to this potential further right-sizing down the line, understanding that it might not be till 2023?
Yeah, again, Alfonso, the service reductions 2023, 2024, that's a long way off. Service adjustments before then on the Long Island Railroad, I would expect, would be in one direction, which would be an increase in service.
Secondly, and maybe this is more a question for Bob Ferrand, but I'll ask you as well. So the financial plan now obviously doesn't assume a fare increase in 2021, but still has it for 2023 and 2025. And we understand that this year's fare increase might just be postponed to next year. So does that suggest that it is conceivable that there may be back-to-back fare increases in 22 and 23?
Alfonso, that's a hypothetical that I'm just not going to entertain. I think the one thing that we're sure about, and this is good news for riders, there will not be a fare increase in 2020. Beyond that, especially given the fact that I'm departing, I'm not going to speculate on it, but that's a hypothetical. The thing that we know for sure is no fare increase in 2021.
Thank you.
All right, so before we all go today, we thought, given that Pat and Annie Zhu are leaving this week, that we would just, for 59 seconds, relive one of those signature lines. If you just take a look at the monitors.
I think it's going to depend. I don't accept the premise of the question in the following sense. And a couple of things. One is I think your question may include a unspoken premise, which I think is wrong. I'm not aware that your assumption is factual. I don't agree with the premise. A couple of things. One is I don't subscribe to the premise. First, I don't believe your premise is right. I don't, however, agree with the premise that reflects reality. I don't agree with the premise for two reasons.
Thank you for this press conference. Hey, thank you for this presser. Thank you so much for this presser.
Thanks, everybody.
That's great.
It.
Thank you. Thanks, Tim. Sorry?
You left us with the air train in LaGuardia. Don't forget about that.
Good news on the air train. Jason, thanks for coming. See you all.
Jason, everybody.